Hello, everyone. Marco's Young here. I am excited to talk about retrogrades today. And I want to bear with. I want to have things look clean and nice before I share screen. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about retrogrades, and I am going to kind of go through each one, each retrograde, and I put together this little graphic for me to help all of us keep track of the retrogrades and when they're happening this year. And then I'll go month to month and talk about the impact in relation to other planets for that month of that retrograde. So before I do all that, I want to talk about, in general, what retrogrades are. So retrogrades are when the planets appear to move backwards in their orbit. And it's because all of us are spinning around the sun, and sometimes another planet's orbit is counter to our own because we are also moving, right? So it's not because the planet is actually moving backward. None of the planets move backwards in their orbits. They just keep moving in the same direction around the sun. It's because our perception from planet Earth and how their orbit looks to us, because we are moving faster than they are, or maybe slower than they are. And that's how it appears. So all the planets have in our solar system have a retrograde period, and that is when it appears to us like their orbits are going backwards and that their motion is slowing down as well around the sun. Again, this is all about perception. It is not reality. And retrogrades have different definitions depending on the planet, what that means. But in general, retrogrades are so dependent on your beliefs about it. So if you think it, it's so, which is a tenet of Wicca, of witches. It's got a lot of correlations in other religions. So if you are thinking a retrograde is the end of the world for you, it probably is. So be mindful of your perception, be mindful of your interpretation. And in traditional astrology, not so much modern, but in traditional astrology, especially, there are, which is more of what I practice, there are plenty of retrogrades that are actually positive, that are traditionally seen as a positive thing. So keep that in mind and keep an open mind, okay? And since all the planets have retrograde periods, it's more normal throughout the year that there is a planet in retrograde than not, because there's a lot of planets. Okay, so Mercury, which is the fastest moving planet, has retrograde periods of about 3 weeks, 3 to 4 times a year. And then Venus has a retrograde period about every 18 months, about every year and a half. And that retrograde is famously for 40 days and 40 nights. In fact, that is the symbolism of 40 days and 40 nights comes from Venus's retrograde period. And then Mars is retrograde about every 2 years, and its retrograde is around 6 months. The retrograde it had a couple years ago, well, yeah, was a particularly long one. It was about 8 months, and that's unusual. And then the gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, they all have retrograde periods that are several months every year, because they all move slower than we do. So, does that give you food for thought? Does that kind of let you reflect on, just the frequency of retrogrades is a clue to their importance. So let's now get into the retrogrades for this year. So this year, Mercury has 4 retrograde periods. It just barely has one that just ended a couple days ago, and went direct. I don't know. It's like in the evening on the first. So in some ephemerises, it ended on the second, and others it ended on the first. All these dates are kind of approximate. So anyway, Mercury retrograde. What does it mean? Mercury is a neutral planet. Planets can be benefic, which means they are more positive in their meaning and effects in our lives than negative. They can be malefic, which means their meanings and effects on our lives are more negative than positive. Or they can be neutral, which not only means that they have, kind of like equally bad, equally good effects, but also that their domain in life is of things that are more neutral, that are not either positive or negative in our lives. So it has to kind of do more with the day to day stuff. So, like communication, Mercury is about communication. So, communication can be negative, it can be positive, it can be neutral. It can be just factual, it can be informational, would be more neutral uh, communication. And then, of course, you can also get into heated arguments, and you can speak poetry and speak of love. And, so it has a neutral domain. So there is a big connection of Mercury to business and also to technology. Um, More and more, we use technology to communicate. I am using a computer right now to communicate this information to you with a video. So it's more techy. So Mercury is a purveyor of technical things. Um, we also use communication, neutral communication, quite a bit for all things business, all sectors, all industries. Um, all of it's a group project. So you got to be in communication with other people. So, Mercury retrogrades can be very like things happen to make you review your situation, to make you redo something, to make you slow down and take stock of how you're communicating, what you're communicating, those kind of things. That is the function of Mercury retrograde. And I would argue that that is not wholly negative. That can be pretty positive too. It can keep you from kind of wrecking your poop. You know what I mean? So, this first one at the top of the year, um, it started off being the retrograde started off being in Capricorn and moved into Sagittarius. As far as 2024 is concerned, that first retrograde occurs in Sagittarius. Mercury in Sagittarius is going to affect communications about sharing visions, visionary things, about education, also about philosophy, and sharing your personal message with the masses, also with getting that, listening to that communication for education or more inspirational kind of communication styles. Those might have hiccups, those might need reviewing, those might have challenges just on the tech side or there's a lot of room for misunderstandings, but they're simple ones. They're simple misunderstandings with Mercury retrograde. And then in April, April 1st to April 25th, there's a Mercury retrograde in Aries. Uh, well, Aries loves to come up with new ideas and do new ventures and new things, but they don't have a lot of staying power. So, coming up with kind of the random idea that is not practical or not going to um, last for a while is kind of typical for Aries Mercury retrogrades. It can also be the bad side of Aries is, oh, they're just so ready for an argument or a fight or being combative. So the negative side of that is more arguments, more conflict in communications are possible during a Mercury in Aries retrograde. So be careful of that. And then August 5th to August 28th, both the April Mercury retrograde and the August one, they're contained within that month. They start at pretty much the beginning of the month and then end before the end of the month, which is interesting for like planning out your year or your month. So keep that in mind. But I love the I love the bookends for those two. Anyway, the August one spends time in two signs, one in Virgo and one in Leo. Mercury rules Virgo and it is at home. It has its domicile in Gemini. So whenever Mercury is retrograde in Virgo or Gemini, that is more of like the classic freak out for Mercury retrograde. Like that's when you should probably not sign contracts. You should probably just be quiet. You should probably just kind of resign yourself that a lot of issues, hiccups, interruptions will happen, misunderstandings will happen with communications because Virgo is so similar to the definition of Mercury, and so is Gemini. And so, it's like same, same. It just kind of intensifies that energy and the possibility. So if you want to be all hysterical and freak out about a Virgo retrograde in Mercury, I'm right there with you. Okay. I'll support you, but only then. So when Mercury moves into Leo, um, Leo is such a sign for positive leadership, for being an extrovert, for putting yourself out there. Um, and so the challenges move more into those arenas. And so if you are not engaged in leadership things, or you're not engaged in really putting yourself out there, um, then the energy is probably not really going to affect you at all. Um, I just realized that I forgot to talk about what it means if you are born during a retrograde. So, because retrogrades happen so often in our year, chances are you were born during one or more retrograde periods. Um, so, if you're born during a retrograde, it's kind of like opposite day. That means that, like, for example, if you were born during a Mercury retrograde, then when Mercury is direct, you feel more pressured, more harried. You might even encounter more Mercury related difficulties during Mercury direct. And then when Mercury is retrograde, that's your time to shine. All the negative definitions don't apply to you. You are like, yes, go, full steam ahead, no obstacles, no impediments whatsoever. And that goes for every planet's retrograde. If you were born during a retrograde, then you have special permission to uh the way is smooth, that to just do your things. Okay. And it is one of the things I particularly look at in birth charts, is seeing if uh you were born during a retrograde and when, and which planet and what sign and all that. Okay. So if you want a birth chart from me, that is a possibility. Okay. Back to the retrogrades. All right. So the last one is right around uh in the United States, right around Thanksgiving break and a little bit after, and it's in Sagittarius. Again, like this one that just ended, it's going to affect more inspirational, philosophical messages, and you sharing them and you receiving them. Also impacts educational communication quite a bit. Okay. Um, so educational stuff is not so impactful, except maybe for finals at mid December. So if you are in school or college or taking a class or whatever, and it ends in December, be careful around finals that, that you handed it incorrect, that there's no hiccups, those kind of things. All right, so let's move on to Mars. Mars is a malefic planet. It is uh, it has so much to do with our personal motivation and how we take action in the world. In your own birth chart, where Mars is really says a lot about how you move, how you work, how you take action of all kinds. Um, but in general, it's a malefic because it is a representation of the god of war. So really prone to conflict more than not. It is traditionally the planet of cutting. Okay, so like accidents, separations, severings, endings can happen with or be indicated by Mars. Um, so it can be pretty harsh. I think the outer planets that are malefic are more harsh than Mars because Mars does have that more personal, action related effect in our lives. Um, but anyway, so Mars goes retrograde at the end of the year in um, December 6th. And for a little bit there, it's going to overlap with Mercury retrograde and it goes into 2025. And it starts at Leo, which is fine. Like Mars does well in Leo because Leo is about positive leadership, and Mars being there can lead to being quite strategic about the actions you're going to take, like a really effective to do list, a really effective business plan, that kind of thing. Especially if it's for something of your own invention, like your own business or your own creative project, things like that. But in retrograde, those activities are challenged. There's a lot of frustration there, like things are not lining up for you to be able to implement your strategic plan in some way. And that can be very frustrating, and that frustration can lead to more conflict. In Cancer, holy cow, Mars does not like to be in Cancer, like ever. It's really challenging because Cancer is like more of the um more of like kind of the home emotional aesthetic, right? Like how we care for our closest people, the familial love that we feel, even the familial grief that we can feel, and the loss, and the ecstasy and the wonderment, all those things. Cancer is very nostalgic. And so Mars is not sentimental like that on its own. And to be put there means that there can be a lot more conflict at home and with our loved ones when Mars is in Cancer. And that's when it's direct. And then when it's in retrograde, there can be a lot of misunderstandings and hurt feelings all around. Okay. Um, I think when Mars is in a more emotional setting like Cancer, and maybe some other water signs, then good advice is to just zip it. Good advice is to just kind of process some things on your own and not dump that on other people, because you can be more harsh during that time, especially if you have a lot of planets like your sun, your moon, your rising, especially in Cancer. Okay. And like any of these, if you have, your big three or stellium or something in any of these signs, then that retrograde is going to be more of a personal effect on you and a stronger effect on you. Unless, of course, you were born during a retrograde. Then it's like, yay! You're a lot more sympathetic and can flow with that retrograde energy. For example, those born with a in a Mercury retrograde, they are they are just amazing. Like their superpower is to communicate in non-traditional ways. Maybe that means with communicating with nonverbal populations. Maybe that means gifted with languages. Maybe that means um, communicating in new and different ways that are not typical, however that means. And so knowing that and embracing that is really great. If you were born during a Mars retrograde, you're probably like, um, did if you've ever seen, it's a pretty old movie now, Punch Drunk. Yeah, Punch Drunk with Adam Sandler. It was a rare drama he did. And I was like, that guy is like Mars retrograde native. So there's a real like tendency to just do and not express what's going on and experiencing quite a bit of delay and frustration in life. But there's a strange aptitude for moving in the world like that, and a great patience and empathy for others that are um, experiencing frustration or delay. Okay, let's move on to Jupiter. Jupiter. Jupiter is a benefic planet. It has so much to do with luck, positive leadership in our lives. It has to do with expansion of all kinds. It has to do with being generous. And it on the negative side, it can be, prone to excess. So I like to think as an archetype, I like to think about the benevolent king archetype, right? They're just so generous. They have great parties all the time. They, their statescraft is a lot about expanding trade, expanding allies, maybe expanding territory, but they're not all that warlike. So if they're going to have to do war, they're gonna like get inspire other people to do war for them. Okay, so that's Jupiter. So Jupiter is retrograde October 9th, clear into 2025, and that's in Gemini. So Jupiter in Gemini can lead to a lot of expansion for Gemini topics, which also have to do with communications. And by proxy, because that's how our world works, technology. So it can be a huge, while Jupiter's in Gemini, a huge expansion of technology, like a lot of innovations, a lot of new methods of communicating, new apps, new software, new hardware, all the new shiny things, all for communicating more, and sharing the written word, the spoken word, all the things. There's also a huge social element to Gemini. So being able to communicate with all walks of life is a big deal with Gemini. Okay. When it's in retrograde, so Jupiter goes into Gemini, um, I think I think several months, if not a handful of months before it goes retrograde. So that is like, yay, everything's on, everything's going great. Maybe excess in communication is the only bad downside to that. But when it goes in retrograde, we really start to see the hangups, the issues, the tech issues, the moral issues with this expansion. It can be Jupiter in retrograde can really highlight how inept leadership has been, maybe the leadership of tech companies, the the leadership even of our governments in relation to communications, in relation to kind of like the regulations of those technologies or those methods. Um, and it brings to mind the issue of AI. That's like the first thing that comes to mind, but it definitely isn't only that, for sure. Okay, so so we may be all aware of like the leadership issues um, when Jupiter goes retrograde by October. Okay, let's move on. Saturn. Saturn is a malefic. Saturn, I like to think of as the planet of karma, even given my imperfect understanding of karma. Um, Saturn rules time. Saturn rules cause and effect. Saturn loves a slow build. It loves deliberation. It loves seriousness. It loves taking your time and things built to last. Saturn is so infinitely patient. Um, Saturn can be a great archetype for a good father, a fair father, also a fair judge. That's very Saturnian. So Saturn has been in Pisces for a while, and it goes retrograde in Pisces in that very end of June, June 29th. And it's retrograde until November 15th. Now, since Saturn is malefic, and I believe Saturn is malefic in that it will give you your consequences. So there's not any grace given with Saturn. It will, you know, let you fall on your face and get burned and all those things. Um, but when it's in Pisces, it's having a really tough time because it's trying to order the chaos of Pisces, the emotional and spiritual chaos of Pisces, which is so inventive and creative and inspirational, but it's not a great builder, right? It's not great at building things, even the slow build of things. So Saturn really struggles. It's like it's trying to order chaos, or it is, you know, an inadequate tool to navigate the fog. So there's a lot of frustration with Saturn being there. And it can more directly affect, the idea of consequence can more directly affect your creative and spiritual endeavors in Pisces. But it's also great for creative projects that just because of how they just take a long time to do, like write a book or make a movie or things like that. This is a great energy for those kind of projects. When it's in retrograde, um, it's kind of good for all of us when Saturn is retrograde because it's like Saturn is a little bit disabled. Saturn is not catching all the wrongdoing or the missteps and giving consequences. It's missing some things, right? You can get one over on Saturn when it's in retrograde. Um, in Pisces, it's like it's getting lost in the fog. It is, um, you can get kind of carried away with um, escapism when Saturn is in retrograde. So that's my caution to you. But in general, it's more of a gentle time. It's a more of a time full of grace is when Saturn is in retrograde, and we're all here for it, right? Then Uranus is retrograde in well, it's retrograde most of this month of January. So it goes direct on the 27th, and then it will go retrograde again later this year in September, September 1st, clear into 2025. And this whole time it's in Taurus. So, first of all, Uranus is a neutral planet. So, the way it's neutral is because its definitions are both um, bad and good. So Uranus rules both sudden changes, which we all know can be both exhilarating and terrifying, depending on what it is, and it rules um, innovation and invention and the sudden aha, like the eureka moment, those kind of things. So it is a huge impact on our creativity that is not personal, that is like for the good of everyone. Like this huge, big inventions that impacts everyone, not just you. So it is it can be good or bad. It just depends on the situation is Uranus, right? So that's why it's neutral. So when it goes retrograde, it's less of the sudden change aspect and more of the internal sudden change, which is more about invention. And in Taurus is such a great earth sign. Um, Uranus has really been causing a lot of change and innovation for our natural resources, for currency, for our environment, those kind of things. And so I really love it when it's like slowed down for invention. And in Taurus, it would be more of natural disasters are possible when it's direct. So that's not so great. Okay, let's move on. Neptune. Neptune, you know, classically it's malefic. Um, More modern, it's benefic. I'm kind of on the fence. So basically, Neptune is very much like Pisces. It's all about creativity and spirituality and kind of our inner world because it's a far out planet and it moves so slowly. It has a generational effect, so it can tell us more about like what a whole generation does for creativity and fun and escapism and those trends. Um, and it can also be like movements in spirituality, humanitarianism, those kind of things. So that's Neptune. Neptune loves the fantasy, loves the dream, loves the symbolism. Those are all Neptune's home base, right? So it has been in in Pisces for a while, so that's very intensified. Beautiful, wondrous, artistic expressions are going on right now and will while it's in Pisces. Also, the same for spirituality. Um, there is an uptick in escapism, especially using substances, with Neptune so strong lately. Whenever Neptune goes retrograde, Neptune dials back the fantasy, even the delusion, and is more attracted to truth. And for Neptune, that looks more like authenticity than actual truth. But anyway, you know, the truth of your inner self. That's what it's interested in retrograde. Um, and it can be uh, a great fresh breath of realism is when Neptune is in retrograde. So that occurs July 2nd through December 7th. And we'll just be able to discern, like authenticity, realness, um, be able to discern bad actors in the realm of the creative arts and also spirituality a lot better while Neptune is in retrograde. Pluto. Pluto is most definitely a malefic. Even though it rules transformation, there is no transformation possible without first having destruction. And when we see that as a generational planet that affects whole generations and whole countries and whole of humanity, that destruction can be quite something to get to the transformation. It's like something bad has to happen before something good can happen of it. That's how Pluto works. So Pluto is in retrograde um, May 2nd through October 12th. When Pluto is retrograde, I have a sigh of relief because we're slowing down a malefic. So we're slowing down that destructive before we get to the transformative impulse. Um, also, Pluto rules our fears, right? The underground of us, our subconscious. So Pluto can be quite scary as well. So all that negative stuff of Pluto is slowed down when it's in retrograde, and I'm here for it. It's in Aquarius, and then it goes so retrograde that it briefly goes into Capricorn this year. And then after that retrograde for Capricorn, for Pluto, it will, starting this year, it will be in Aquarius for the next about 20 years. So it's a big beginning of Pluto in Aquarius movement, which Aquarian themes are like humanitarianism, philosophy, being of service, those kind of things, which in general are, and being creative, which in general are great things. But like transforming those things, whew, that's going to be a harsh journey. Um, so when we begin that, we're going to start with destruction and it's going to be tough. Okay. So hang on to your hats with that one. And then Chiron, I include Chiron here. It's my favorite asteroid. It is the unhealed healer. It is giving out of experience, but not necessarily positive experience to others. So Chiron goes retrograde 7/26 through December 29th. And in that retrograde period, Chiron brings up like your own personal suffering and then asks you to help others in that same way, even though you're still struggling yourself. When it goes retrograde, we're more focused inside. We're more focused on trying to heal that for ourselves, which is good, which is good. In Aries, this is all wounds that have to do with um, self awareness and identity. Like, who am I? What should I do? What am I meant to do? Those kind of things are Chiron in Aries topics. And you can receive wounds around that as well from the collective. So it's important to have periods where you journey inside and kind of figure that out before you're dealing with how others interpret you, right? So that's the retrogrades for the year and when they are. And now I'm going to super quickly go month to month because I want to keep this under an hour. For 2024 in January, we only have two retrogrades. One is only for a couple days, and that's Mercury, right at the beginning of the year. And then Uranus stations direct from its retrograde on the 27th. Unfortunately, that feels like the cuffs are coming off for Uranus. And then when I look at the kind of the chart for the month, I'm not seeing a whole lot of rough aspects. Maybe that Uranus is touchy with Saturn in a square kind of energy, but not exact. There's not an exact one, I don't think. Let's just double check. Nope. So it looks smooth. So we got retrograde with Sagittarius, which can make you think about your motivation and your inspiration and things like that. And then with the Taurus and Uranus, it's really about resources and maybe sudden changes with that after being quite innovative about resources. Let's look at February. February has no retrogrades. It's one of those rare months this year without retrogrades. So, unless you were born in any retrograde periods, February is a great month to steam forward and not anticipate any obvious obstacles or hiccups or slowdowns. Okay, and then let's look at March. March, again, there's no retrogrades in March. Although, if you follow shadow periods, yeah, I'm not even going to talk about that because I'm not convinced that's a huge thing. But March is the beginning of the eclipse season, which is a whole different topic that can cause challenges. So again, March is full steam ahead, like just do the do of the Marchness. And then April in general is maybe the most changing, the most volatile, astrologically wise month of the year of 2024. There is a great American total eclipse, for example. There's quite a bit of things going on. Anyway, see my April astrological report when that comes up, or my year in total, what I say about that. But Mercury stations direct on April 1st. I mean, it stations retrograde on April 1st and doesn't station direct until April 25th. And that's both in Aries. So watch the arguing and watch the conflict in communications that are possible with that retrograde. As far as retrogrades go, just having a Mercury one is not terrible in itself. But added on to the other things going on in April, it super doesn't help. It can cause a lot of misunderstandings. So be careful with that. In May, Pluto goes retrograde. Ah, so nice. And it starts off in Aquarius. It looks like it's going to be in Aquarius all month, so it doesn't scooch back to Capricorn. So anyway, some things might come up with the collective at that time, but it will be a space to reflect and refine that transformational impulse. In June is, the main time with Saturn going retrograde. But at this time, it's also joined by Pluto retrograde. So, I mean, both the heavies in the solar system are going to be like, are going to be kind of like debilitated, right? That are going to be disabled. So it's a great time for doing the shenanigans. And let's see, for July, Pluto and Saturn are joined this month in a retrograde of Neptune. Neptune wants the truth and it wants it authentically, which is great, actually. And also, Chiron goes retrograde. So you might want to attend to your own healing this month instead of being in everybody else's business, which, how can that be bad? In August, we have, like the whole month, we have a Mercury retrograde, which can possibly increase confusion and not knowing what's going on. But wanting to know what's going on with the other retrogrades, the Saturn, the Pluto, the Neptune. But by the 28th, the end of the month, Mercury goes direct. And again, it started out in Virgo, which is no bueno for Mercury retrogrades, but ends in Leo, which is a little better. Leos wouldn't say so. I do. In September, then Uranus is joining the party with all the retrogrades. I actually think that's good because, the possibility of a lot of natural disaster kind of things and supply chain problems slow down, and we're working on how to make things better in those areas. And then October, we have Jupiter stationing direct. So October, for most of October, a lot of the planets are in retrograde. So it may be just in general, it may be tough to get anything done or like productive things done or jiving with the collective energy at that time. Um, and it does kind of get intensified by Pluto going direct on October 11th, because Pluto direct is ready to get back on task with tearing everything down in order to build new. So that can be rough. By November, Saturn is direct and is more doing things that are productive and more balanced about energy, with that direct energy, being more productive, but you're also prone to getting your consequences when it goes direct. And then that's aided by a Mercury retrograde on the 24th. So might be some misunderstandings around the holidays. And the December retrogrades, Mars does its retrograde, but Neptune goes direct, Mercury goes direct, Chiron goes direct. So by December, we just really have Jupiter. mm, that's it. Jupiter, just Jupiter and Uranus doing retrograde along with Mars. Yeah. So Mars likes to fight, but you're heavily supported by other things clearing up, for it to be maybe conflicts that are productive and lead to better things. Okay. And watch the frustration. All right. Well, that's my read of 2024 retrogrades. And I hope that helps for your own planning as well as understanding of retrogrades. And yeah, I'm going to sign off now. Thanks.